On April 24, 1980, an ill-fated military operation to rescue 66 American hostages held in Tehran ended with the deaths of 8 American service members and the failure to rescue the hostages. To learn more about Operation Eagle Claw, watch until the end. The situation in Iran. On November 4, 1979, about 3,000 student militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 63 Americans hostage. 3 more members of the U.S. diplomatic staff were detained at the Iranian Foreign Ministry. The incident occurred 2 weeks after U.S. President Jimmy Carter allowed ousted Iranian ruler Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi to enter the United States for cancer treatment. Iran's new leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, called on the United States to bring back the Shah and also to put an end to Western influence in Iran. By mid-November, 13 hostages had been released. However, the remaining 53 hostages waited out 5 months of failed negotiations by April 1980. During this time, U.S. military commanders refined plans for a possible rescue operation and conducted exercises to evaluate the troops and equipment that would be used in such an operation. President Carter approved the military rescue operation on April 16, 1980. Preparing for surgery. There also seemed to be a suitable tool, the first U.S. Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta, which had just recently been created by Colonel Beckwith. According to his estimates, it took at least 24 months for the unit being created from scratch to become ready to carry out combat missions. By coincidence, it was November 4, 1979 that became the date of completion of the formation of Delta. Formally, the unit was ready to carry out combat missions, but in reality, Beckwith probably understood that it would be worth starting with a simpler operation. However, on paper in Washington, the upcoming operation did not look very complicated. Delta just had to fly from the U.S. base in Oman to a jump airfield in the Iranian desert, their transfer to helicopters, fly to the next point near Tehran, their transfer to trucks that were supposed to be provided by previously abandoned CIA agents, and take by storm captured embassy. The last point did not cause any particular concern. It was unlikely that the Iranians were ready to repel a full-scale attack in the middle of their own capital. Then, according to the plans, the freed hostages and the Delta were again picked up by helicopters and delivered to the next airfield 50 kilometers from Tehran, which by this time the Rangers from the 75th Regiment were supposed to capture. There, everyone boarded transport planes and flew safely home, and in the Oval Office they opened champagne for the victory of Delta and at the same time, Jimmy Carter in the future elections. The need to involve different types of troops, each with its own interest, made the operation with the loud name Eagle Claw. Problems began at the preparation stage. It was decided to equip the helicopter force with deck-based RH-53D vehicles. These helicopters were on board nearby aircraft carriers, so their departure would not attract much attention, unlike the fact that land vehicles appeared on board. But the regular crews of the vehicles assigned to the operation had experience in searching for and sweeping sea mines, a task, to put it mildly, different from landing troops in the depths of a hostile country. At Beckwith's insistence, they were replaced by pilots of the same type of airborne CH-53 from the U.S. Marine Corps. This was a little better, but these pilots were trained mainly to disembark from ships during daylight hours. According to the plan, the helicopters had to fly long distances at night and at low altitude. Another dubious point was the choice of the location of the temporary airfield, called Desert 1. In this capacity, it was decided to use an abandoned British airfield from the Second World War. According to satellite intelligence, no Iranian activity was recorded in the area. The final reconnaissance of the airfield was entrusted to Air Force Major John Carney together with the CIA. On a light twin-engine aircraft, DHC-6 Twin Otter, designed for use from small unprepared ground areas, they landed on the future Desert 1. Landed in the desert, Carney had an hour to take soil samples and place infrared beacons, which were to be activated by radio signals from approaching transporters. He didn't want to miss the plane. An alternative was a system consisting of a cable and a balloon. The balloon was supposed to lift a person into the air, where he was picked up by a specially equipped C-130 Hercules. Carney really didn't want to check how it would work, so he caught the plane. Sample analysis confirmed that the old airfield was fully capable of handling the C-130. This was good news. The bad news was that there was a highway running right through the airfield, along which 2 cars passed on the night of Carney's visit. But since redrawing the entire operation plan was difficult and time-consuming, and the White House demanded that the operation be carried out as soon as possible, the command decided to act on the principle, if the facts do not correspond to the theory, so much the worse for the facts. The appearance of Iranian cars was called an anomaly and was not reflected in the calculations. Operation Eagle Claw. On the evening of April 24, 1980, Hercules transport vehicles took off from a U.S. base in Oman. 3 planes took Delta and Rangers on board. 3 more planes were loaded with fuel and rubber tanks. On board the first C-130 were Charlie Beckwith, Carney, and Transport Commander James Kyle. A little later, 8 helicopters took off from the deck of the Nimitz aircraft carrier. Operation Eagle Claw began. To avoid radar detection, the RH-53D pilots were ordered to stay close to the ground. Considering that at the same time there were much more visible C-130s flying overhead at the same time, this was not the smartest idea. However, the low-altitude flight itself was not so scary for experienced pilots, even if they had to fly with night vision goggles. From the cockpit of the lead C-130, the real problem looked like a light haze over the desert. In fact, they were dust clouds. The sandstorm did not threaten the Hercules flying high above the ground, but the helicopters did. However, Beckwith and Carney could not warn the helicopter pilots directly. The satellite communication equipment available on the Hercules did not match the frequencies of the helicopter pilots. The warning from the operation headquarters in Egypt was late. The helicopters flew into a dust storm. Visibility, already not the best at night, became almost zero, and the temperature in the cabins rose. Then the equipment began to fail. Helicopter No. 6 was the first to fail. Control instruments reported an impact with the blades. Having destroyed the secret documents, the crew moved to another car. The next victim was more serious. Part of the equipment and machine No. 5 of Colonel Pittman, the helicopter commander, failed. Having assessed the situation, he decided to return to the aircraft carrier. As a result, out of the 8 RH-53Ds that launched, 6 vehicles reached Desert One. At the same time, another helicopter's backup hydraulic system failed. The pilot was ready to take a risk and continue the mission without it, but the Marine officer who replaced Pittman categorically forbade lifting the faulty aircraft into the air. Operation Failure. To his credit, Attack Charlie was Delta's first mission, and given the political aspects, he knew that not only his own career was at stake, but also the fate of the entire new unit. However, the arithmetic was clearly not in his favor. To complete the mission, 6 helicopters were required, and on Desert One only 5 remained operational. There was no guarantee that these RH-53Ds would survive to the end of the operation. The Claw's plan said "Stelp," and it was the only word on the page in capital letters. Beckwith decided to abort the mission and return. Disappointed paratroopers began to sit down on the Hercules, right on the half-empty rubber fuel tanks. The transport workers were supposed to take off first, but the maneuver of one of them was interfered with by Major Schaefer's helicopter No. 3. A burst tire prevented it from rolling on the ground, so it was decided to fly to another place. An elementary operation in normal times, but concentrating on control, Schaefer did not notice that the controller giving him instructions retreated to the wing of the Hercules, fleeing the dust raised by the blades. He did not know that his figure was practically the only thing that the pilot could distinguish, and Schaefer, guided by it, also moved the helicopter forward. A few seconds later, the blades of the Sea Stallion, like a giant circular saw, ripped open the skin of the Hercules. There was a clang of torn metal, sheaves of sparks flew, and a new fire blazed on Desert One, almost brighter than the first. The platoon on board the Delta managed to escape the burning C-130 before ammunition began to explode in the tail of the aircraft. 5 Hercules crew members and 3 helicopter pilots were killed, and several more people were seriously burned. The flying debris damaged neighboring helicopters. After the explosion, the fighters in the remaining planes decided that Desert One was attacked by the Iranians and, dispersing, opened fire just into the darkness around them. Additional activity came from the remaining C-130s, which tried to roll away from the blazing puddle of fuel, and some soldiers decided that the pilots had chickened out and abandoned them in the middle of Iran. Beckwith barely managed to restore at least some semblance of order, but still the departure from Desert One was more like a stampede. The Iranian prisoners were ordered to wait on the bus in the morning, with the ignition wires cut and a hastily made-up tale about snipers keeping an eye on them. Ammunition continued to explode in the remains of the Hercules from time to time, and the Americans did not even risk blowing up the remaining helicopters. Instead, a request was submitted through the headquarters in Egypt for a bombing attack on Desert One, but the attack aircraft never arrived. The headquarters decided that the risk of killing civilians on the runway was too great. Perhaps the decision would have been different if the base knew that not only the equipment, including secret equipment, but also documents remained untouched in the RH-53D, a complete description of the operation, right down to information about the Iranians collaborating with the CIA. The result of Operation Eagle Claw was the loss of 8 people, 1 C-130 transport aircraft, and 7 RH-53D helicopters, some of which the Iranians subsequently recovered. The hostages taken at the embassy were returned to the United States after long diplomatic negotiations under the next president, whose name was Ronald Reagan. Delta creator Charles attacking Charlie, Beckwith resigned after the failure of the Iranian mission,